Hi everyone, Calais Stockstill here and Diane Barnard. My ALF Training. Diane, how are you?
Well, thank you.
Today we're going to discuss caregiver burnout. Diane did the research on this, so you want to give a little introduction while I share the screen?
Yes, certainly. So I think that caregiver burnout, so there's a couple layers of caregiver burnout, but for just to start, we're going to talk about caretaker caregiver burnout, and we're going to discuss it both in a family sense as maybe an involuntary or an unpaid caregiver in the home, and also it impacts similarly. There are some differences in professionals that work as caregivers in a professional capacity. So we're going to address both of those, some of the signs and symptoms, some of the causes, and maybe possibly offer some resolutions to it or ways to at least optimize your well-being that you don't take so much of a hit. Because with burnout, I think that anytime taking care of another human being, I mean, obviously we all want to do a very good job, but it is very taxing even, and I think that to set the stage for anyone who is listening to this, it's almost impossible to escape the possibility of caregiver stress and burnout, even if it's your mother, even if you love them more than anybody. It's just an exhausting and almost sometimes impossible task. So hopefully in this conversation that we have today, we'll be able to plant a seed that not only are these feelings of sometimes guilt, frustration, being overwhelmed, normal, sometimes they're almost expected just in the possibility of the task. Particularly,
I just want to just to tie it in with assisted living a little bit, because we're dealing with both, right? You as a caregiver and also the family that's coming to you because they are burnt out, because they need help, because they need this extra thing. But so it's two perspectives we're trying to accomplish here.
right.
That person has brought their loved one to the facility more likely because they burnt out. They've done as much as they could.
Right. And associated with that, there has to be some kind of connection of empathy, because a lot of these people, when people have uncomfortable feelings such as guilt or anxiety, and it's so overwhelming, you feel like you let your loved one down, they sometimes react in ways that aren't so welcoming, aren't so friendly to the caretaker. Sometimes when they see the caretaker do better than what they could do themselves, there's a lot of feelings. So I think that also to expect not only some difficulties with your own feelings, but to expect that people that bring their loved one to a facility are also going to have a plethora of mixed emotions, and some of which, and maybe all of which, you'll never understand. But if you understand the possibility of them, and they're not always good, you're more balanced, you're more able to weather the storm. So caregiver stress and burnout, I did some research, and according to the World Health Organization, burnout is considered an occupational phenomenon. It's not a disease, but it is classified in the ICD-11, which is the International Classification of Diseases. But even though it's in that book, it's considered a phenomenon. And as we talked about, it can impact anyone that's involved with caretaking someone, both professionally and family caregivers. And for our intents, we are talking about people who are professional caregivers, but sometimes the line between the two is a little blurred. When I was doing some of my research, some caregivers, at least 60% of caregivers caretaking in the home also work outside of the home, and often they're working as caregivers. So when you're talking about people, some of the complications and why it's even more difficult is really the state of our healthcare right now. Pandemic aside, we have so many people are living longer, but they're also living more sick. They are living with more complicated diagnoses, more medications, more side effects. They're discharged to home, and they're discharged to assisted living or whatever. They're discharged with wound vacs, and they're discharged. I don't know if you have them in assisted living, but they could have catheters. They could have anything that is just simply not taking care of someone, something that makes it more difficult to take care of them, more challenging. And most people that come to assisted living obviously require assistance in ADLs or IADLs of some kind. So they're all dependent. So shorter hospital stays, when people go to the hospital, because it's a money-driven system, they come up very quickly. Women that used to have babies stayed 5 days, they're out the same day now. So more challenges when they aren't able to heal or they don't get that immediate supervision. Sometimes they get more complications more quickly.
Well, the recovery and the care is placed back onto the family and
correct,
or the facility. Yeah.
Also, even if healthcare changes, people's way of dealing with pain have not. So people that may have been medicated, had one of the pumps at home, are now at home demanding some type of pain, or having to get up to go to the bathroom, when before they might have had, there was a little bit of a wiggle room before they were discharged. So we talked about increased technology use at home and in placement, increased cost of care, increased responsibility of caregivers on all fronts, assisted living everywhere. And then, of course, you can't forget the pandemic and all the challenges associated with it. This is an incredible stress on everyone. Fear, anxiety, am I safe to go to work? Do I have the right PPE? I mean, this is just another layer on an already complex situation. So what is caregiver burnout? Can you scroll up a little bit? So,
and just to touch on that, I mean, it is a burden on the staff, and that's a great point to make. And this current pandemic with COVID-19 is a moment in time, but there are other times when the burden, it's heavy. For example, hurricanes, right? We have hurricanes. There's 2 forming down in the Gulf, or may go into the Gulf, and that puts a higher level of stress on the caregivers as well. So, being a caregiver, you do have a lot of responsibility.
Right. So, so caregiver burnout is when the caretaking stresses, which are humongous to start with, they combine with other life stressors, and they just become overwhelming. And everyone is unique, and every situation is unique, of course, but the common theme is their physical, emotional, and mental exhaustion, 1, 2, or 3. When the 3 of them are combined, of course, it's even worse, but you can become physically burnout. You can become emotionally and then mentally exhausted by your job. And it impacts you. It impacts the quality of care that you give to your resident. And I've never met, and hopefully never will, met anyone that entered this field not to care for the person. So this is pretty significant when the person just is too exhausted to care. And that's what caregiver burnout is, essentially. So we talk about compassion fatigue and caregiver burnout, and some people interchange those things, but according to some of the literature, or a lot of the literature I read, compassion fatigue kind of is a part of caregiver burnout, and it starts first. And it's combined with a secondary stress trauma response, and then burnout occurs. So compassion fatigue is when the caretaker becomes overcome with emotional and physical exhaustion, and they have a diminished ability to empathize or feel compassion for others. And some people call it the negative cost of caring. So you're kind of winding down and becoming more numb. And then when we move on to actually the burnout, so I did link some links in here, some scales, because I think that when people, when you care for someone else, it seems like you have more energy, more enthusiasm, and you just want to do the right thing. So you pull all your strength together to get the job done and just be this amazing person. And when we do that to ourselves, sometimes we mask over how we feel. That's how the numbness overcomes us. And then you're just like, I don't even know what I'm doing. So sometimes not that people should go and self-diagnose with scales, but sometimes the stress scales are helpful, because what it does, it puts in black and white. We're like, oh yeah, I did have a divorce this year. Oh yeah, I did go bankrupt, and or whatever those things. Sometimes even a move, a kid goes to college. Sometimes good things, a wedding can be a stressor. So there's lots of things that disrupt your normal routine that can really layer on stress, anxiety, uncertainty, that really impact everything across the board. So compassion.
It is hard. I mean, when you are caring for people, I mean, when you're there, it's all about their issues and
Right.
their difficulties. And I mean, as a human, and like you said, that you have your own issues and your um, own traumas. So it's hard to put that in the back seat. But
Right.
I think that, like you mentioned here about the empathy fatigue or the burnout, I guess you can be aware of that, you know, notice, am I losing the ability to empathize?
Right.
And ask yourself, maybe you're on some level of caregiver burnout or.
Right. Particularly, like, I always think as a psychiatric nurse, I always think, like, what is the baseline of the person and are there patterns of change? So if you're normally enthusiastic, are you normally the one that's bringing donuts on Donut Tuesday? Are you the one that's playing bingo on Thursday? And then all of a sudden you're like, I'll pass. One time might be, but if there's a consistent pattern, a distinct change in your enthusiasm and what your normal patterns would be, that probably is a clue that something isn't right. When you're just avoiding the things that had brought you joy in your job before. There are clues. I always say success leaves clues, and so does failure. And not that you fail at your job, but any change, I think that anytime you're looking for some insight into yourself, you look for your changes and patterns and then try to figure it out from there. So when we're looking what causes caregiver burnout, well, the causes differ for professional and family caretakers, but in essence, it's the caretaker becomes overwhelmed with too many responsibilities. And there are some things that can be done system-wise. There's certainly things that someone can do individually, but there are also things system-wise or organizational-wise that they can do as well. And so when a caregiver is, first of all, they have to verbalize what they need, if they need help, and then they have to accept the help. A lot of people are like, that's okay, I'll do it. But I think, or they feel that it's like some kind of failure if they get someone to help with their mother. Like, you know, I love my mother, I shouldn't have a stranger taking care of her. But the first thing I think on an individual level to try to manage caretaker stress is to understand that you're fallible, that you're not perfect, that you need help, and to learn to ask for help. And after you ask for help, actually accept it. So, but on the work, I'm sorry.
In context of an assisted living facility, you know, I think that a great work environment would make you feel, you should feel like you can ask for help. Like your coworkers should want to help you. And sometimes I think that, you know, you should go and seek out to help people. If you want to help to facilitate that great working environment, then when you have some downtime, go seek out and see where you can help. And I think that it can come back and help you. And it is a team effort.
Right.
So don't just think you can't ask for help from a coworker, or if they're not helping you, maybe you need
to. 100%. And I think about when I work as a team, I used to always work night shifts. And there were two, one lady was always 7 minutes late. And the 7 minutes, because you could punch in 7 minutes late. Mm-hmm. Agony. You know, you're up all night and you're in a mental health ward. It was agony. And just like by the time that 7 minutes came and our shift replaced, we were like, are they coming? Are they not? You know, all kinds of things. And just like, if you even really are mindful and you think, where am I individually as a member of this care team? And am I caring for my patient? Am I caring for myself? And am I caring for my coworkers? And caring for your coworkers would be, I had another lady, like she loved when I used to fill up the water. This is back in the day, because when I would fill up her water jugs for her to pass meds, it was just so easy for me. And I never realized it was so meaningful to her until she told me. She goes, I absolutely hate when you don't work because the water jugs are never filled up. And so the little things that could make somebody just their day flow so much easier, not going to get ice or what seems small, but it's important to different people, to know enough or be aware enough of your environment to be able to create that we're in it together, we're helping each other out. Because that really, I read once another study where people don't leave jobs because of low pay. They leave jobs that they don't feel valued. I mean, they will stay longer. Of course, if the wages were obviously amazingly different.
A big disparity, right?
Yeah, but they would rather stay where they felt valued and they liked who they worked, or they felt the sense of purpose. And that meant just as much as maybe a pay raise. And so I do think that when you work for a team and you're working in collaboration with people, that it just makes everything so much better. So not only be aware of yourself, be aware of the care that you give others, but also be super aware of where you fit into in that team, that shift.
And it's hard to be like one of those caregivers that are always helping, always doing things for others. And then when the time is there and you maybe need a little help and it doesn't get returned, that is difficult. That's a difficult situation to be in.
Right. But then, you know, I think a lot of times working together, like a team, to me, is almost like one of those rock tumblers. You know, you have all that noise and that before you get the smooth. And people just assume because there are 5 people or 6 people on the floor at one given time, it's a team. But a team really takes some trust and vulnerability. We could do a whole nother training on that. But not only to be able to ask for help, but to be able to follow up why that help was not received. Like, hey, you know, Renee, whatever, because basically to be committed to some type of resolution, it's uncomfortable to get to that, but it's so worth it if it forms a good team. Even if you're not always the same team on the same floor, if you have those skills to ask for what you want in a nice way, in an assertive way, for the patient care, you're better off, and so is your organization. It's a skill worth learning.
It's preventative, really. It's helping you prevent burnout. So let's carry on. I'm sorry.
Okay. Sure. So okay, so basically when caretaker stress, and nobody starts out thinking this is going to happen, but it's the focus on caring for the individual overshadows self-care. Sometimes organizations put a lot of demands on people. I understand that. Like, let's say I have 5 patients and they're all very complicated, but this happens a lot. I think it's more evident in like a family caregiving situation where they equate love with their ability to do this wonderful, impossible thing. Particularly or in an assisted living, when somebody that you have taken care of for a long time all of a sudden starts to show signs of dementia or maybe limited mobility or whatever. And it's somebody, you cannot care for someone over a length of time without actually caring for them. I mean, you might care for this person, but most people develop some type of real bond and affection for the person that they care for, hopefully. And I think that a lot of times caregivers, when they see this person who's important to them and important to their day start to fail, they ramp up the tension on their ability to help that person succeed. And that is where it begins to become unbalanced, because they're like, well, if you know, she might have to move to nursing home, so we got to do this and this and this. That's what happens in the home as well. Like, if I only do this, if you sit here all night. And sometimes the situation, it will come to a natural end. I had read somewhere in my research that the end of life care sometimes lasts, or the average is 4.5 to 5 years. So when someone is in decline, that's a long time. Do you know what I mean? To keep that tension up. So that's where education on different disease processes, getting help, you know, being able to be authentic in your report. So like the best level of care could be decided for this individual, but somehow it always starts out well. People don't overfunction for themselves. They're doing it for someone else, but it can backfire. So, and it backfires because the pace is unsustainable. You know, mom's up out wandering all night, you stay up all night, and then you go to work because you can't let her get hurt. You know, that kind of thing. The financial, physical, and emotion burdens are unsustainable. That would be, in assisted living, that wouldn't really be something because you're not personally responsible.
For the financial end, yeah, but understanding
Yeah.
on, their stress from the family members because they have a financial burden as
I
well.
would say, I would say that it is very expensive to keep someone, we do a great job, but it is expensive. But I think that through the years, so here's an example, the caregiver, it's easy to judge people when the kids don't buy maybe something they think that the patient needs, and they're like, well, why wouldn't they? Because I think that you have to keep an open mind and reserve judgment because you really don't know that person's journey. And maybe they can't take their mom out to dinner every Thursday because they're working 2 jobs. So I have heard different people saying, I wish the family was here more often, but maybe that family member is working 2 jobs to keep their mom safe. Like you really don't know. So just to reserve your judgment because people are struggling to keep their loved one the best they can. So
And by them being in a long-term care setting, there are jobs. I mean, that's why you're
oh
there.
yeah, absolutely. That is a really good point. So I like this quote from this woman. She had this book, and it was a book about caregiver burnout. And she said that it occurs when people who love their work move from one client to the next. So this would really apply to assisted living in some ways. One human crisis to the next without time for themselves and their renewal. And it seemed like this burnout is more pronounced in professional caregivers. This might work for people that move from client to client in the home as well. But also it's really like a loss when you bond with somebody and they move on to like a higher level of care. I think that there is a level of grief that's associated with people moving on when you don't want them to.
Yeah, from my experience as well, one of the hard parts, I mean, we know, Mrs. Johnson is passing, she's on hospice, but we've all, she fit into our life and we understood her likes and her dislikes and we got to know the family members and the residents become really a part of your life. And, Mrs. Johnson passed and it was known and the families, relieved in some level because, they know that she was suffering, she wasn't living her best life. But at the same time, it's really hard to start the process over again with another person. And it's so much easier just continuing on with people that and
right,
the routines that you've developed with those residents and those family members.
right.
So that causes a little bit of stress as well.
Absolutely. So this was just a couple things about just some causes of stress, either in so role confusion. I don't know if that would apply so much, but it could in some ways apply to the professional caregiver in assisted living. Sometimes we do assume take on more than what we should. We bond more than we should. It's hard not to do. It's hard to maintain that professional distance. Unrealistic expectations, and I think that I think that's where education comes into play, particularly with dementia or any type of debility that's going to get worse. That it's not your failure. You did everything you did. You helped her practice her exercises every day and she still fell. Whatever that would be understand that it's a progressive decline. And I think that a lot of caregivers, whether they work in assisted living or not, assume a little bit of power, like some type of in their mind that if they only did this, if they did this so well, it was going to make all these outcomes less likely to happen. And when they happen anyway, it's hard to deal with, such as falls or hospitalizations or moving on or death. Lack of control over the situation. That's a little bit of a stress too. We're talking as if all family members are loving and wonderful, and this is the human race. We have all different kinds of people, and sometimes when the caregiver is very invested in the person and they see family members maybe making decisions that they don't agree with or they would not have done themselves, then that would cause a stress for somebody. And then the last one would be the person who is a caretaker having no insight into their own well-being. They're so involved in being a caretaker for other people that they don't take care of themselves and they don't recognize that they're not doing that.
Well, little things like well, we know we have to make sure that our residents are hydrated and eating the proper nutrition and getting exercise. Are you doing that for yourself as well? So even
Right.
throughout the day, just small things like that, eating properly, thinking about your health and wellness.
When I started being a nurse on the floor many years ago, we used to joke that nurses had the strongest bladders. You just never went to the bathroom. And in the nurses' lounge, they always had a report room. It was always jam-packed full of donuts and cans of popcorn, like the worst. If you could take a picture of the worst diet ever, it was in the nurses' station at Christmas time from the doctors. So we were just, it was for a long time, nurses had just terrible self-care skills. I think it's improved, but I'm sure it's like that in a lot of places.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like the residents who live in the facility, there's a nutritional plan put together by like a registered dietitian. They're concerned about a balanced diet, concerned about activity, stimulation. And, I think that, and I don't know, you put this together, but definitely try to put together your own plan for yourself, try to come up with a balanced program and get a little exercise every day and try to plan your meals properly and don't just rush out and get fast food. And these are all preventative things.
I agree. So if you want to scroll up, caretaker stress. So of course they can symptom and then they can vary in symptoms, but exhaustion and depression, you pretty much are there. But leading up to that, just being tired, backaches. Backaches aren't always backaches. There are a lot of signs of emotional stress too. Stress, anxiety, depression, hopelessness, kind of like not kind of numb, not feeling anything. Lack of self-care, like when you look down and you're wearing the same shirt with stains on it from 3 days ago and you're like, oh. And people do that. They're like, oh yeah, I didn't have time to do laundry. Withdrawal from activities and relationships once fulfilling and important. If you never were a runner, then it isn't unusual that you're not out running. But I always look at patterns, like when you look at yourself, everybody has an emotional home to me. Everyone has a baseline to where they thrive. Like if everything all lined up in your life, what would that look like? And at your best in your life, what did you do? What kind of interests did you have? Like interests do change through the years. But if you were once an early riser who loved the birds and drinking coffee and all of a sudden you're sleeping all day and there's not a change, a rule, that's something to look at in yourself. If you've always slept all day and you're a night shift worker, maybe not. But when you notice patterns of change for the worse, then you should probably have a little introspection. Sleep disruption would be difficulty falling asleep, intermittent night awakening, nightmares, or early morning awakening. And some of these things all tie in together. Like you get overly tired, you take something to go to sleep, you're like, I don't have time to cook, so I'm going to just eat this box of macaroni and cheese. You feel stressed out, you're up all night on your screen, whatever the screen is without the blue light feature, that's very disruptive to your circadian rhythms. And then it just kind of like it just cascades into this big, it's a gift that keeps on giving. So you really have to look at your patterns. Independently changes of appetite. You could be snacking all day or not eating at all, or you get sicker more frequently. So there's many things that are clues that something isn't right. So I wanted to just talk briefly because caretaker stress is for family caretakers too. And I thought that some of these were interesting. How many billion hours of care that people are doing in their homes, which is amazing. And not all of them want to do that. So that's a huge stressor, like they can't do anything else. So they are actually working a job, coming home, working a job because they don't know where to go and they don't know how to get help. So when they do finally come to you, in some ways there's grief because they've really soldiered it through and they've tried to take care of their loved ones. There may be jealousy that you can do a little better job now. Or there's just immense like, immense relief. And they
They
might,
also another stress that is that when somebody does care for their, let's say, caring for their husband, nobody's going to do it better than the way they do it. So when they move into your facility, you know, they're going to be overly protective and telling you exactly how you're doing it. If you're not doing it,
yes.
they've done it, then they'll correct you. And even though you've been doing this, you have way more experience, maybe caring for people. The best way to do it is to, and that'll put stress on you, having this stress that that they have. So communicate with the family member, ask them, you know, how do you do it? Can you show me? And
Right.
let the family member demonstrate and try to mimic those ways and see if.
That's an excellent point. I think that I often think that I've always worked with either dementia patients or IDD kids that really I always consider their primary language isn't the one I'm speaking. But the one thing that I learned, and in some ways very angry people aren't really communicating at that level that you and I are communicating right now. But my personal philosophy is everyone instinctively knows the language of kindness. So even if you pause with your nonverbals or whatever, if you lean forward, if you actually look at this person with interest in what they're trying to tell you about their loved one, they may not change that red hot minute, but you're more likely to begin to forge a better relationship. And a better relationship with that family member means a better work experience for you, bottom line, and for everyone else on your team. So
I like that point a lot. And that carries over to not just the resident's family, but your coworkers and everybody else that's important in your life.
right.
You know, like Diane said, people can sense kindness, genuine kindness. And I think it has a long lasting impact.
Yeah, I agree. They can also sense disinterest. They can sense, I just really feel that we're very fluent in knowing, and sometimes we judge wrong for sure, but I think we're very fluent when we know that someone isn't really hearing us. But anyway, just some of the things, like I had said before, the last phase of life lasts a long time. And when someone has dementia or disability or a motor neuron disease or is in pain, those 5 years seem like an eternity for their family. And so there's every day that loved one is in pain or decompensating or whatever is a day of grief for them, kind of. Just to extend the possibility of some type of compassion for that person, maybe it's too painful for them to visit all the time. So just to consider that's a possibility. So when the daughter comes every month, you're not like, I'm here every day. You know, it just really helped them celebrate and enjoy their visit. I thought this was interesting. Men are more likely not to be supported by employers for their caregiving duties, which was interesting. Not the professional caregiver, but somebody who's working outside the home when they have to say, I got to go do this for my mom or whatever. Like, I thought that was interesting. That came from Aging in Place, that reference. And then also like physical, if you think of physical disability, which would involve toileting and Hoyer lifts, if that's something that they have there, or would involve like maybe actual physical transfer or picking up very heavy people, that's actually less challenging for someone's mental health or their ability to experience burnout than someone with dementia or mental health disorders. Those are more mentally stressful, particularly someone who is delusional and is blameful. That's a very difficult thing to do. So when we move up to professional caregivers, we already talked about the ICD-11 and the World Health Organization, and that they considered it a phenomenon. And so these were the 3 dimensions that were I pulled from the ICD-11 site: feelings of energy depletion or exhaustion, increased mental distance from one's jobs, or feelings of negativism or cynicism related to one's job, and reduced professional efficacy. your work, like your notes aren't on time, you're just like, it's good enough. I mean, your patterns will show, like if there's a slip in your work, then, and there's a slip in your attitude, it's connected to some kind of you've disengaged your engines a little bit, even if you didn't do it deliberately. I know that misery loves company, they always say that, but when you start kind of seeing like other people grumbling and then commiserating with them, that's usually a sign that something isn't right. Even if it's true, if you find yourself sliding down instead of pulling them up, that's a sign that you yourself are probably at risk for burnout. So if you want to scroll up a bit.
I think that there's always a way to look at a situation and find a silver lining somehow. And yeah, I would say not getting pulled into negativity by your coworkers or other people around you. Try to maintain a positive, healthy mental outlook.
I worked with the crankiest nurse ever. She was world famous, and no one wanted to go get a transfer from the second floor ever. And they used to send me down and say, you go get the patient. I'm like, okay. But one time, and she certainly was a cranky woman. But one day, the patient coded, and she snapped into life. And she got us all together. I'm standing on the bed holding the IV bag, and we pumped that patient back to life. And it changed my perspective of everyone's, I was respectful to her in the first place. I would go down all the time, but I had a real earnest regard for her skill, her ability to be decisive, and we saved his life. And I often think of every time, I always find, there's one time in your life, like that's my anchoring piece. There's always going to be one anchoring piece for everyone where you can say, yeah, I thought this, but my goodness, I was glad that person was around. They have such value in this. If you could only restructure how you see someone who is challenging like that, that could make the difference between a very good day and a very bad day.
Yeah, and every person's different, and their skills or what they can bring to the table are different. Maybe, for example, we had employees that were just very good at tasks and very good at cleaning and cooking, and they would get frustrated because they would look at their coworker who was sitting on the couch talking to the residents, and
right,
they're lazy and they're not helping me, but they're not understanding that that's important too, and they're also filling the emotional role for those residents. And so it was always a balance act to say, I completely understand, like these tasks need to get done, but to find those better points in each person and see how they're improving.
Right. I remember when I worked 3 to 11, and we used to think that daylight and night shift, every shift complained about each other. And then the hospital that I worked for decided, okay, then you're all rotating shift. This is impossible. And as soon as anybody got on night shift, we're like, this is exhausting. How do they get this done? But at that vantage point, you could, unless you rotated through, and unfortunately they kept that because you had such an innate appreciation of somebody else's talent that they never did go back to regular shifts, because it eliminated everything and it gave us perspective and insight as much as we didn't like it. But it was interesting that 2 days in, you were immediately so grateful and you knew exactly what they did. I think that it's human nature. Without that person, everybody does have a toolbox of, like, they have their points that they do very well. And I think that the synergy and all of those working together makes a wonderful work experience. We need the people that know all the nurses' notes on time. We need that task-oriented person that everything tags up at the end of the shift, that the microwave is clean and this is done. And we also need that person that's running the bingo and that can problem solve someone being frustrated or upset. Or we do need all of those.
Listening to the resident stories.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And then when you close up, like, your goal as a team member should be finishing that shift beautifully and strong with the patients, all the things that you needed to handle well as possible. And in addition to resident care, there's also the business of assisted living, which would be making sure, oh, here goes my dogs in a minute. There's a bunch of dogs outside.
It's a cameo. They know when you're on.
What's that?
They know how to make an entrance.
Yeah. So there's no, I think they're not going to do it. There was somebody barking outside. So I do think that, appreciating that your cup of tea may not be doing all those tasks, but somebody's is, and that's what makes you get out on time. And that's what makes you finish that shift as a masterpiece, really, and makes people want to work with you again. Because basically you want to be the person that walks into a room that people feel relief that you're walking in, not despair. So I've always had that philosophy. Like if I pulled up in the middle of an emergency, would people look out the window and say, thank goodness she's here? Or, oh no, this is going to be chaos. And I'd want to be that person where I add something to the situation or to the shift. So.
Professional organizations that study caregiver burnout.
Okay, so these are a couple of different things. I mean, there's actually a science to measuring burnout. It just isn't somebody saying, well, I'm feeling blue or I'm sad or I'm whatever. There's a couple different inventories that they've used when I looked at some of my studies, like what did cause burnout in professionals. And this burnout inventory is used by the World Health Organization. And then there's a stressful events questionnaire, and that can be used by anybody. And that's the one that I had referenced before. Did you get a divorce? Did you, get married? Anything. Stressful events don't necessarily have to be negative ones. A move, they could be very positive ones. Going to college, that's a great opportunity, but it could be very, very stressful. So those are just some references. So if any of the people wanted to look them up. And then I have some characteristics or situations that make increase. There, that isn't right. But anyway,
may increase. Let's use live editing here.
We're going to do live. We're going to stress people out and edit live. May increase vulnerability to burnout. And then so female, and this was all researched. I have some references in the bottom. It appears that if you're female, you're more likely. Now, it could be that there's a larger number of female caretakers, but that seems to predispose people to a burnout. Less formal education. So with that doesn't mean that you're not able to learn, but sometimes when people have a more formal education, then they understand, well, dementia is a progressive disease. They have like maybe more tools to understand the situation and maybe have a more balanced approach about it. So somebody that lives in the caretaking situation, and this might not apply to assisted living, or maybe if someone is hired to do private duty or something, stay with someone through the night if they're just out of the hospital, constant contact increases the tension. It increases someone's vulnerability. That ability not to escape, not for a second, that situation is, it can be very stressful.
Well, there are people that do longer shifts, some even up to a few days.
Yes.
I know nursing, you do 12-hour shifts, and I mean, those longer shifts can be more difficult for sure.
So what I noticed about the longer shifts, I don't do longer shifts, but I supervise workers who work blocks. And then I supervise people who don't work blocks. And the ones that work in blocks, they consider their shift almost like a marathon. The form kind of slides as they stumble toward the end. Even when they don't want to, they're very verbal and they're aware that they start out, with fidelity to all treatment. And by the end of that, now it works. I work with residences with IDD kids. So it kind of where they're not doing intensive interventions, but the kids are incontinent. They certainly have really rough behaviors. It can be a very long couple days shift. So by the time when I get them on the first day, that's my time to try to plant seeds or come up with a plan. And if we develop a great plan for that block shift on the first day, then we finish a little stronger. But if we start, so sometimes organization and timing is key. So when we develop a plan on the first day, we finish a little better than if we're scrambling to fix something, or maybe the second or third day. So organization of your shift, if you're going to do a very long one, is helpful. So the other things are a number of caretaking hours. Obviously, as we just said, the more you're working, the more it takes its toll. Low coping skills. What's your personal emotional competence or emotional intelligence? Are you able to cope with things? Our coping skills go up and down. If you're normally financially pretty secure, you've paid all your bills, your kids got straight A's, it's a nice day, your car just got inspected, you're probably going to cope a little better than if your husband left you, or there's snow outside, or the hurricane's coming through. So your coping skills, your own psychological resilience is one thing, but then you layer on environmental and work factors, so that can change as well. If you're an involuntary caretaker, that's not really applying to assisted living, because obviously you're working and you want to be there. But somebody that doesn't have any choice is more likely to be stressed. So that might be someone who felt such guilt. That might be that family member that felt such guilt, resented it, finally got to assisted living, and now feels guilty because she failed. Like, not only she got what she wanted and she's not feeling any better, or he isn't feeling any better. And then personal pre-existing mental health issues, such as depression or anxiety, that sets the stage for even worsening symptoms. So identifying caregiver burnouts, flags, or symptoms. So we talked about the life scales and inventories, and you can scroll down. So these are the red flags, is when you start an overwhelming sense of personal responsibility. And only each individual can define what that means for themselves. But a lot of people take on, they become very bonded to their people. They maybe do extra things. They work a little longer. They worry when they're not at work. Does nobody, I mean, we talk about the, a good point, we talk about the family member thinking you're not doing something good enough. In turn, your coworker may not think you're caring for Mrs. Johnson good enough. And that adds an uneven and awkward situation at work. You would do it better when you came in, her water bottle wasn't filled up, the bed wasn't made, she likes her pink shirt on Tuesday. So sometimes just be aware of maybe you're taking too much assumption or responsibility for your patients. Unclear work rules, that's such a big one. That's where I think organization and boundaries are very, very important, particularly in that block or lengthy shift when you're like, you do it. So that when you're very clear about how that is supposed to look like, pretty just right down through to the end of your shift so you can finish strong and stick the landing, that takes some clarity and that takes some pre-planning. In order, because if not, it will decompensate and you will feel out of control. Long hours, that's just, I mean,
well, I want to touch on that, like the work rules, the long hour, the work roles, especially with COVID nowadays, and like shorthanded, everybody's shorthanded. Maybe people can't show up for work. They have symptoms, they can't come in. So the burden is put on the direct care staff, and you are probably doing the work of more than one person, and it's difficult. And sometimes companies that you work for, maybe they just are shorthanded, and that definitely will lead to burnout.
100% with this. I know that our frontline heroes are these people, not only assisted living, but people working in group homes and coming in every day. And we've had COVID in our houses, and like we're flipping people, and like they're leaving, we're getting temps in, and the kids are very violent. It's difficult on the best day, almost impossible during the coronavirus pandemic. So That is definitely stressor, and the hours are extreme. They're very, even for me in telehealth, where I normally wouldn't have done it, I'm now interspersed from 8 a.m. till 8 p.m. or 9, just with different when we can fit in. So that's different for me, like just working all the time. I'm doing telehealth, so I'm very grateful, but just it's short shift. You just have to kind of plug yourself in where you are. It's certainly a change. So personal health symptoms that may indicate that you're having stress, and then we touched on some of those things. Like, first of all, you have to know yourself and what your patterns are, and what has changed for you. And number one would be loss of just kind of feeling numb. You're just loss of interest or enthusiasm for your life in general. Not being able, boss, don't do it. Not being able to have work-life balance, like, because when you bring your work home or you're not able to have that work-life balance, then it is going to impact your life, because let's say your husband was looking forward to going out to dinner and you come home, you're like, I've had it. I don't want to go anywhere. This is horrible. That then impacts your relationship life. So it really is worth the effort to figure out, how can I achieve, how can I upgrade myself?
You know, I really think that that's something that a lot of caregivers don't get this type of self-help guidance. You know, when you go to the library or you go to the bookstore, when Barnes and Noble, you know, one of the biggest sections was like self-help. And I think a lot of the self-help knowledge needs to be passed down to the individual caregiver. So we'll be creating a whole new series on that, on that type of thing. But I think that you need to focus, you need to try to do something for yourself every day and just make it routine, like small things, like walk, or, you know, read a book or go exercise, and try to, you as a caregiver, you're putting so much focus on everybody else. Even if you're, you know, the head of the household, where you come home and you take care of your family, and then you go to work and you're taking care of all these other people. I think you need to schedule time to figure out how you can do something for yourself, so that you can take care of other people.
I agree. And I think a lot of people can be addicted to a lot of things. You can be addicted to worry, you can be addicted to work, to alcohol, to drugs, whatever. But it's almost like, but the patterns are the same. Like anything that's consuming you from living a balanced life, or that you cannot stop, like whether you're involuntarily caretaking, I get that, that is difficult to stop. But to be able to live your best life for an hour a day, even by escaping into a book or listening to a playlist, it's something that you have to develop as a habit. Almost make an appointment with yourself and keep it. So when we're looking at symptoms, is changes in sleeping. We talked about that, which is difficulty falling asleep, early morning awakening, getting sick more often, mood swings, irritability, stress eating. I think everybody is stress eating during coronavirus. And weight changes, and that could be down. Anxiety, depression. And I put change in bowel habits because sometimes that's the first thing people notice. They think, I don't know what's going on. I'm going to the bathroom all the time. And that's stress. Strategies. So here's what we were talking about. So you can't, all of us have to work. Most of us do. But the strategies, hopefully, I don't really think that there's an option not to implement them. They're like, not today, not today, not today. But really, if not today, when? Because sustained stress over time will cause diabetes. Sometimes just that increased immune response and the cortisol response. I mean, it can impact your blood sugar. It can impact your heart. It can impact your
relationships.
Your relationships.
Yeah.
So basically, I think that, I mean, it is, everybody is struggling, and I'm not saying some people obviously have it worse, but if you are going to try, or if you think that this is an issue, because if it is going to be an issue and you do get burnt out, then say that the place you work says, you got to go get help, you can't work, your mate leaves you, I don't know, whatever. So it's worth trying. And so, and the first thing that I think that you should structure is that everybody is going to fail a caregiver. Nobody's caregiving. No one is emotionally resilient enough to watch somebody they love suffer or die without having some blip on the radar, the emotional radar. So to think that you're going to be so strong and make it perfect and everything's going to be great, and you're going to show up and you're going to fix this and you're going to, it's unrealistic. So some of the things that we talk about.
We have 10 minutes.
What?
10 more minutes.
Oh, 10 minutes. Okay.
Okay.
We're almost to the end. We're almost to the end. So get regular checkups. And that means, like, if you feel a lump, there's no, you're like, I got to work. No, you don't. You do have to work, but schedule an appointment that places you as a person of value in your life. Like, get your checkups, and not only get your checkups, get your prescriptions filled. And that's where the organization comes in. Don't say, oh, I'm out of my blood pressure pills, and then go to work upset. Like, make sure, like, make an appointment once a week, like a half an hour. Check and see if your life is in order. You have your prescriptions. Are you sleeping? Do you need an appointment? Do you have bald tires on your car? Eat a healthy diet. If you don't know what that is, we all have the internet now. The bandwidth is huge. You can look up anywhere. Find out what that means for you and try to do that. Make a commitment to exercise 3 times a week. And it's not, you don't have to do P90X. You just have to take a walk to get your heart rate up for 30 sustained minutes.
Don't take your phone.
Yeah, don't take your phone. Develop a sleep routine. Limit alcohol. You know, coffee is a stimulant. Alcohol is a depressant. And people are like, I drink to relax. You know, or I have to feel better. But if you're depressed, it's actually a depressant. So make sure that if you have a blue screen feature on your phone, if you have to look at it late at night, make sure that you turn that on, because seeing that bright light messes up your circadian rhythms. It'll keep you up all night. Learn to meditate, and people laugh at that. They think it's new age, but it's amazing. Watch happy movies, make a happy playlist, journal your thoughts and feelings.
I have to say, I really agree with the watch happy movies. Like, a lot of people will watch tense movies, horror movies, like,
right,
those thoughts, those things in your life at all. You know, I think it's really it's a great point. And as much positivity that you consume, and that includes negative people in your life.
Right.
You know, I don't know if it's on this list, but like, if somebody's always negative, you know, try to maybe figure out ways to spend less time with them.
So I was listening to somebody. I try to start every day listening to a self-help thing, a little clip or a funny clip somewhere, and until I actually laugh out loud. And there was someone that said that you're kind of like the composite of the 5 people you hang around the most. And if you notice they're all cranky or whatever, like, try to upgrade them. It doesn't mean they don't have to have value, but get them out of your, like, try to bring somebody in that balances it or actually inspires you to be or do better. And it's actually helpful. Not like make new friends and keep the old and all that, but really to bring in your inner circle, people that mirror the way you want to be. And if you don't want to be miserable or whatever, try to find somebody that really makes you want to be a little better. I love this one. Learn to ask for help and then accept it. And then make a date with yourself every week for self-care and pencil it in. Like, if you have time to get sick and go sit in the cardiologist's office, you have time to make a date with yourself to read a book or sit out in the sun. People make time to be sick. They never make time to be well. So then we have understanding, you know, what's normal and overwhelmed, set realistic goals, always learn about the challenging behaviors in debility and dementia, because knowledge is power. If you know how challenging someone with delusions are, you're less likely to take it personally. Join a support group. They're everywhere now. They're online, they're on Zoom. Look into respite care if you're a family caregiver, or help caregivers understand that you yourself might be respite for someone. I love Get Organized to make your life simpler. I think that your life is like an organization, and the root word of organization is organized. And then check your area agency on aging for resources. And that's it. I just have a little summary where it's a challenging thing to do. But the beautiful thing in all my research is, despite all the burdens, all the caretaker stress, all the compassion fatigue, 90% of caretakers still found value in the job and wanted to do it. I thought that was very inspiring.
Yeah, and it's very rewarding. But it, I think that's the point of this training, is to say, be aware that of yourself and your needs and the people around you, so that you can maintain those relationships and not burn out.
I have one other thing. Like everybody, most people watching this have been on airplanes, and no one listens to the stewardess, but every time she gets up there, she says, if the oxygen mask drop down, put it on yourself first, because you cannot save anyone else if you can't breathe. No one listens to her, but that's really good advice for
point. Yep. You put your oxygen mask on first.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, this was a great training, Diane. Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're so welcome. It's always.
Thank your dogs for joining us.
I gotta laugh them out. But that's one thing. Pets do bring great joy.
Absolutely. No, next time you have to share them with us.
They're big. Yes. But working from home and Zoom, you've got cats in your head. And I saw like a funny clip about that once, and I thought that they were kind of making fun of it. And I thought, no, that's really my life. In Zoom meeting. So,
all right, Diane, I'm going to stop the recording. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day.